Welcome to Hacking Postgres, an interview podcast with the people working on open source projects around Postgres, which in my opinion is the world's best open source database. I'm Ry Walker, founder of Tembo, a managed Postgres company. And today I have Phil Noël from ParadeDB, working on ParadeDB as my guest. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, great to actually meet you. I'd like to start. Maybe you could give us a quick background, like maybe where'd you grow up in the world, and what were you doing before Postgres?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So I'm originally from Quebec City, the French part of Canada. I actually grew up in a small town called Rivière-du-Loup, which is 2 hours east. Spent most of my life there, and then eventually I left to go to university. I stayed in Boston. Studied computer science and neuroscience, did a few things. I started a browser company before ParadeDB, which I ran for about 3 years. And then after that, got acquainted with the joys of Postgres, you could say, through that experience. Sounds somewhat similar to yours, maybe, although not to the same scale. And my previous co-founder and I then we started ParadeDB.
Nice. Tell the browser company, what was that called, and how far did you get in that project?
Oh, that is both a short and a long story.
Okay.
It was called Wisp. We were building a cloud-based web browser. So the initial idea was to offload heavy processing to the cloud via streaming, which is like an age-old idea, but we were young and dumb, so we thought we had invented something. We did that for a while, raised a couple rounds of funding, grew a team to like 25 people, but we never quite found PMF, and eventually pivoted into cybersecurity. Did that for a while, but it was a much better market, but not our battle to win. So we closed down the company.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure we have both have a lot of battle stories we could commiserate over.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So do you remember when you first started using Postgres? I can't remember. That's why I like asking this question, because it's like it kind of just happened at some point in my career. But do you remember specifically when you started with Postgres?
I don't know, actually. That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like as a user, I don't know. As a developer, since like earlier this year or last year, but
yeah. Well, cool. Tell me what. Obviously, as a user, you've used it for years, I'm sure. Tell me about like your Postgres work. Like, what are you? What have you built in the past, and what are you building now? Or is this just this first? Is this all just the first thing? I guess.
I would say it's the first major thing. So maybe we can keep it to that. What we're doing, so we're building ParadeDB. ParadeDB is a Postgres database, essentially, or Postgres extension, where we're integrating native full text search within Postgres, which is something that some people are quick to jump to say this already exists, and some people are quick to jump to say the one that exists is very bad. And so they're very excited about what we're doing. So it depends which camp you fall on. But the first thing we released is this extension called PGBM25, where we're essentially integrating like proper full text search within Postgres, and then combine this with some of the existing innovations that have come, like pgvector, to build hybrid search. And our goal is to build this Postgres type database that is sort of the go-to choice for companies where search is critical to the product they're building.
Nice. Why do you think you're working on this? Like, what led you here?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, this is a problem we faced ourselves, and that's kind of why we wanted to solve it. So after my first company, my co-founder and I, we were like trying to decide what we're going to do next. So we started doing some contracting work, like sort of left and right. I was living in Paris at the time and working with a lot of French and German company. And when we were working with this German automaker, they just really needed like high quality full text search within Postgres for the product we were building for them. And instead we had to glue Elasticsearch or some vector database on top. And it was just a nightmare. And we just were very frustrated with how bad it was and decided, you know what, maybe we should just fix it ourselves. And so that kind of led us to today.
Got it. Yeah. It's interesting. Like, I don't know. There was a famous tweet that I can't remember the exact wording on, but it basically said something to the effect that, hey tech founders, like, you do yourself well to pivot to building something that would support whatever you would be building today. Like basically go one level deeper, than your current idea is. It's similar to what we did at Astronomer, because we were basically building a competitor to Segment, clickstream data processing, and then we started using Airflow. Then we said, hey, like let's just provide Airflow as a service, and kind of made that switch to go down a level, and that was the winning pivot, for that company. So it sounds like you're kind of jumped down to more of an infrastructural issue, which I think is good. What challenges? I mean, it's obviously there's a lot of ground to cover, but what are your biggest challenges, would you say, you faced so far building this thing?
You mean like business wise or technical wise or Postgres wise?
Actually, yeah, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear all categories of challenge. Yeah, like spill the beans. Like what's hard? What's hard about this? I mean, I imagine like fundraise. I mean, it's a tough time to fundraise, so like that's probably not awesome. But yeah, maybe start technically.
I can start technically. I think software is the easiest part of building a company. So I would say these are our simplest set of challenges. Not to say it's easy. I mean, I was actually talking to Eric that I listened to the Hacking Postgres episode with Eric, and I talked to him afterwards. Like, at first we didn't know PGRX was a thing, and we were like, oh my God, like how on earth is this even going to be a thing? And then we found out PGRX was a thing, and we were like, wow, it went from like near impossible to like quite doable, really. So like on the technical front, I mean, there's just so much you need to do when you're building search, right? Like we have covered a small ground of features of what people expect, and there's so many more that we need to build, and so we're trying to prioritize that.
So like obviously Elastic is probably the big competitor. What, like, I don't know, can you estimate what percentage of their functionality you aim to replace? Is it essentially 100%? And what's your progress towards that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, our progress is small. Like it's small enough that you can use it, but like Elastic is enormous, right? I don't think we aim to replace or to not to replace, sorry, to match like 100% of their features. At least for like search from transactional data, which is what we do today. I think we actually had a decent bit of the way done, and definitely enough to keep us busy for another couple of months. But I think we're like that's sort of the first step of what we're looking to match. Beyond that, like with everything Elastic does for observability, that's sort of another story, and that's another milestone that we will see, depending on what our customers want.
Well, and obviously, like I'm building a fresh new tech startup as well, and I understand like you got to match the functionality of like I call it the table stakes features, but then you also have to come up with some differentiators, or else no one will care. So like, what are the biggest differentiators you're thinking about with ParadeDB?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think for ParadeDB right now, the differentiator has been, ironically, I would say the combination of two non-differentiated things, if that makes sense, which is like if you want to do search over transactional data, ParadeDB is sort of the best solution today because it's the only thing that actually truly combines the two. It wasn't done before. And so sort of our initial interest, I would say, has come from that. So typically when people wanted to do this, they would have some managed Postgres provider, right, of which there are many. And then they would use Elastic, and then they would need to combine the two and then run the two and so on, and it can be a ton of work. And so ParadeDB sort of makes that a single system, and especially for small companies, which is where you've been starting, it's been a lot easier to manage, I would say. And so that really draws them to us. That's sort of like our quite initially. But we have like some other things that will be coming up, which hopefully will like expand on this sort of initial interest.
Yeah. I mean, it seemed to me like, as I think about building my next search bar in a product, I have to decide, do I want to go what I can call like the old school way versus vector search? Like maybe I can get away with some sort of like AI integration for search, Is that, do you see, are people asking that question, or do they have a perception that maybe like vector search somehow gets, replaces or displaces in some way, traditional full text search type features?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. A lot of people have. I've talked to a lot of people who weigh in on both sides of the coin, I would say.
Yeah.
My personal take is both will remain quite important. Just because, like, at the end of the day, people will still have data and will still need to be able to find instances of that data, right?
Yeah.
And like, there's one way to find it via, similarity, but there's also sometimes you just want to start from a clean slate. And so I think both are quite valuable. Most of the people we talk to, hybrid search is very important to them, like the combination of the two, both big and small companies. And that's one of the reasons why we built Parade the way we did today, where, PG Vector exists and so many others. And I would almost say vector search is kind of table stake now. Like, we don't really have to innovate on that so much ourselves, I would say. But the traditional search is kind of the piece that's been missing, which is why we released this first extension, PGBM25. And then we offer the combination of both as well within Parade with another extension called PG Search, which we're going to be publicizing more heavily soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it seems like, it seems to me like you can't, everything has to have an AI story, or else perhaps it's been outdated, right? So I think even full text search, you can say. So I like that. The hybrid answer is a good answer. Obviously, then you have to figure out how to hybridize it all, and that's not necessarily trivial. But yeah, I'm curious to see what you come up with on this.
Yeah, it takes some effort. I would say, like, we definitely have an AI story, but our personal take on the whole AI world and fate is like AI is sort of a step function improvement on existing things being done, but you need a foundation of like value proposition for customers on the fundamental, like, non-AI part of the product, if that makes sense. And that's kind of how we think about it. Like, there's so many people that are trying to bring AI when there was like nothing useful to begin with. Well, I really think of AI as taking something that was useful to begin with and making it that much better. And so it kind of plays quite well, actually, with the way we've been going about, delivering this product and saying like, hey, we'll just give you really good full text search. And obviously so much more can be done. But if that is not useful in the first place in Postgres, then like, who cares that I can add AI to it?
Yeah, I agree. I think about it like, you can't build AI without training data, right? And you can't have training data without a product, to collect some base level data. If you have a base level of product without AI, it's gotta, basically you have to start without AI to have data at all. And I think that's a challenge. A lot of founders, maybe they're thinking they're going to go straight to AI. They're like, there's nothing. You got to start. Yeah, you got to start basic. Yeah, I agree. Well, so what are some big milestones? How many big milestones do you have envisioned for ParadeDB at this moment?
That's also a good question.
I mean, you probably have a next one, right? You usually know your next big milestone. Hopefully, you'd have that.
Yeah, of course.
And you don't have to tell me what it is, but like, I'm curious, like, how far ahead.
Happy to share. I mean, to be honest, our big milestones was to get 1,000 stars in GitHub, and then some stranger posted our repo on Agri News, and somehow that happened in a couple of days, which was really exciting and rather unexpected. Now our big milestone is we're about to release like our own small version of like a managed Postgres-ish, specifically for ParadeDB, specifically to test, how else we can deliver value to people. Like, many that have been using the product so far have been using our self-hosted version, which, I'm sure you're extremely familiar with how people don't want to do this, doing Tempo. So that's the next big milestone that's coming. Trying to learn to manage this. And then after that, we have a couple of, I think after that, we'll see like the exact number. We're just trying to get more people on it and see what they think, really.
Yeah. Just grow users. This is another thing I've been thinking about around just even like we have stacks, at Tempo, like with different use cases for Postgres, and then some things ought to be workloads separated from other things. Like, for example, you keep your analytical workload separate from transactional. That's clear. But search is interesting, whether that's like an add-on. Like, is that just work that the transactional database should be doing, or is it somehow, do you think like the workload for search should be isolated from traditional transactional workloads from an application standpoint?
That's a good question. I think it depends what product you're building, to be honest. Because you don't want to slow down transactions. That's something that's very important to us. For example, like I think it's possible to integrate it. I think it's up to you.
Yeah.
The way we're thinking about it, so the way we've built ParadeDB is we offer weight consistency over search. So what this means is the way we build search is we have inverted indices that store the tokenized data that you want to search over, but those are weakly consistent. So just like if you use Elastic, for example, and something like ZomboDB, and then you synchronize it, like there will be some lag between, transactions being updated in your database and then eventually being reflected in your search engine. The same thing happens, but it happens automatically for ParadeDB. Instead of being, it can be minutes sometimes. It'll be like a few seconds at the very most, but it ensures that your transactions are never slowed down, which is quite critical for people. So I think if you build in that way, it's actually quite possible to centralize it and have it be like integrated with the actual database. If you don't use a product where search is built that way, then I don't think you want to slow down your transactions. You have to isolate them.
Yeah, I mean, I just think of I think a lot of people obviously just do it inside their transactional database because, it seems like overkill to spin up a new Postgres just for search, for full, especially like traditional shitty full text search, that's available, But if we want to get good search, if I wanted to build really good search into an application, I would go buy Algolia or something like that. And that clearly is a microservice at that point, right? I'm sending data to them to index, and they're sending me back results, really quickly that are happening. It's not taxing my main database as a part of that. So I kind of like thinking of search as let's call it great search as a microservice, candidate for sure. Because the better you make it, the more compute it requires. The more compute it requires, the more it's competing, right? So I don't know. I like the idea of just taking that worldview that great search needs to be separated from the transactional. Or analytical.
I think you're right in a lot of ways. Like, you do need to be able to orchestrate it properly at scale. This is definitely something that we will ponder more and more as we have more people using it and using it at greater scale. I do think even if it needs to be like solely separate from what we have done today, one of the great things and where like DBMSs and Postgres managed companies like ParadeDB or Tempo show up is in the ability to just make it transparent to the customer, the actual complexity of the orchestration behind the scene, right?
Yeah. Well, cool. So, you've been writing code for a number of years now. Like, what would you say your the most important lesson has been, kind of switching from the technical to the interpersonal or just like professional? Like, what's do you have any like top lesson if you're going to meet with a young developer, you'd say?
Specifically on writing code,
Yeah,
I would say, specifically on writing code, I would say only write the code that you need to write.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like a big one. Like our previous company, like maybe I'll bundle it with this one. I like to think of products and startups now as like science experiments, right? As like works of art. And I think our previous company, we thought of it as a work of art. And so we came out of college, we were so incredibly into it, and we wanted to be perfect. Like, we cared so tremendously about what we did that we always went above and beyond, and it always made the product better, and it involved writing more code, but it never made the product, it did not always make the product better in a way that meaningfully improved the experience of the user or like brought us closer to product market fit, right? Cool. And so I think if you think of a work of art, like, it's never finished, it needs to be perfect, versus a science experiment is more like, what's the bare minimum I can do to validate or invalidate this hypothesis I have, right? Or deliver value to a customer. And so what I would say, what I wish I could say to my younger self was, if no one has asked for this, I don't think you need to do it.
Yeah. It's a good point. So you're more of a science. You're saying like be more of a scientist than an artist, perhaps to some degree, when you're starting on something and it's not validated.
I think so. I mean, I think a lot of great products are almost like work of art. Like people were so obsessed over it, and you can feel that, And so I don't think you want to leave all types of like aesthetic approach or like care, to it. But I think definitely early on, like before you even, sink so much time into it, you just want to get feedback quickly, right?
Yeah.
And that involves just only writing the code you need to write.
Yeah, I'll tell you a quick story. Like when we started Astronomer, I have a good friend, Greg Nieheisel. He was CTO and basically my partner in crime. And we just very much, mind melded on a lot of things. But our attitude, following your principle was like, really what we were building was this like beautiful lattice of glue, and everything was open source inside. So we used, for example, Google's Material Design, which had just come out, and we built a UI like adhering to it perfectly, and ended up being a beautiful UI because guess what? Those guys built a great framework, and we had no designer on the team. Google was our designer. We would joke about it all the time. And we actually chose a color scheme for the company that was kind of googly, had the same like 4 main colors. So it was really easy to build something great. But that we really built, the first version of our product was entirely open source components just glued together in a unique way. And that was our art. It was like this inner skeleton of orchestration or just like I said, like I think of it like a lattice of glue that's holding all these things together. And it was a very successful product, and it looks, basically how you arrange open source components is art. It's a creative endeavor, I think, and it's enough for a brand new product. It's enough art. You don't have to go and reinvent, like for example, the Airflow UI during this really hard early project, and you don't have to go reinvent the Postgres UI, like you kind of maybe want to, but you're like, let's handle the first things first. So did you think of a lesson that was non-technical that you learned that you would tell your younger self, or not really?
Oh, I have so many. I spent a lot of time thinking after our previous company that didn't work out.
Yeah.
Specifically, I mean, I don't know. Like, this is a broad question. I could go in every direction. I think. Let me think. Which one is the best one to share?
Yeah.
I would say like two, maybe. Okay, one interesting lesson is when we were. I'll focus it on the youth as well and what you mentioned. Like when we were building our first company, our first product. We felt very righteous. We were like doing something very difficult and like objectively technically difficult. And like a lot of people have tried before, and we were like, they must have done it wrong. Like, who are they? People with more experience and context than us, to know how to do this really well. And so we always like started every premise of what we're doing from the premise that we were correct. Right. And then we were like, strive to like further validate the fact that we were correct. And I think this leads to like a lot of cognitive dissonance when you turn out to be wrong, right? Because you're like, you had this idea of like what you were thinking, and it's now being challenged versus now like the way we think about it. And I mean this from a personal standpoint, from the way we talk and hire people, from the way we talk to customers, from the way we try to build product, that we just think we're wrong. Like I always assume I'm wrong in what I think. And then I strive to prove myself correct, right? And if we do manage to prove ourselves to be correct, then it's like a very positive moment. You're like, that's amazing. Like I found this like great surprise that I wasn't fully convinced of before. And if you turn out to be wrong, you're like, well, kind of thought I could be wrong all along, like not a big deal. And then sort of like drop this and move to something else. And I think it's a mental framework that has served us a lot better in everything that we do now.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a tricky catch-22. Like you have to, as a founder, live in a reality distortion field just to change the world. Like you have to have a crazy idea that most people disagree with. those are the best ideas. Unfortunately, they're also the worst ideas, like,
exactly.
and just accept that, like, hey, you might be at the same time, like, you have to also fight for your idea, even if you hear a negative, it's like, man, I built all this infrastructure for it to be righteous. And now, it's hard to quit. It's hard to give up on it, but, and I think it's wrong to give up on it a lot of times, because again, like I think that some of the best ideas, like, almost everyone would disagree with as it starts. But I agree. Like, it's a much better mindset to understand that it's a lottery ticket sort of odds, not hey, like, well, if you were a good student, like, you can get an A in a class, right? You can get an A. It's just a matter of doing the right amount of work and you'll get an A. But it doesn't work that way with startups. Like, it's
exactly,
cool. So, well, I'm curious, like, are you paying attention to the Postgres ecosystem and other developments maybe that you're excited about, that you've seen, since you started working on Parade?
Yeah, I have. I mean, there's just so much that's happening in Postgres. Obviously, pretty excited about Tempo. Been following you guys' journey. There's, I mean, just like recently, there are people that, I forget the name of the developer. That's very embarrassing. But someone released PG branching, which maybe you've seen, which is like, so I was talking to Nikita, the CEO of Neon, right? And he was like raving about their branching system, which I'm sure is world-class and amazing. But it turns out other people might, be able to do this someday, which is good for the community, perhaps. So I think that's quite an exciting extension that, that hasn't been made by us, for example, that we're very excited about. And there's many others that I could list.
Yeah. It's interesting. My first reaction, I saw like AWS announce, we have active replication available on RDS. It's a new extension, and I responded on Twitter, is it going to be open source? And, crickets. So it makes me feel like, time to, like we'll study that extension, and the community needs to just build the open source version of it if they won't do it. Like, I think I'm not salty about how the big clouds operate, extracting value from open source, because I'm extracting value from open source and you are too. We all are, like, all the way down. Like I said, it's like value extraction all the way down to Linux, like, and, they could be, obviously their goal is to build a proprietary alternatives. I really wish there was a Postgres company out there that was big and was, worrying about the whole open source ecosystem. That's what we're trying to do. There's so much. There's so much going on. It's like, I don't know if it's because I'm looking at it now, or if things have changed in 2023, versus 2022. It's great that it's happening too during what I would consider like a lull in the venture ecosystem as well. So I think the stuff that's happening now will be strong. They always say, like, the startups that start during the slow parts of venture usually end up being more successful than the ones at the hype, cycle. So you and I are both lucky, we're starting here, even though it might not feel that way sometimes.
I think it does feel that way though. Like, we raised our seed round. Things went quite well. It was a challenging raise, but like challenging because people were very critical about what we're doing. And I think that's good, right? Like, the first company, we raised money on a terrible idea, and we thought raising money was the good part. But actually, if you have a terrible idea and people convince you of that early on, they're actually doing you a favor, right? So I think it's good. And I'm very bullish on the companies that are going to be founded, that have been founded, this year, and that will be founded next year, and so on, because I think you're right. Overall, typically they turn out to be quite good.
Yeah. So do you have a couple of favorite people that you've met in Postgres land? Give them a shout out if you do.
Yes. Sure. I mean, I met Eric, which I think will take the prize, for my favorite one. Like, he's very humble about it. He keeps saying TCDI needed PGRX. I think they really did it beyond what was needed, for the favor, like, for the benefit of the community. So I think he's definitely gone above and beyond. He continues to go above and beyond. Another one, maybe you know him, or not. he's the writer of one of the PG internals book called Hironobu, who's this Japanese man who lives in Europe now.
Huh.
I haven't engaged with him very much, but he's made this resource called, I think, interdb.jp or something like that. I could send you the link if you're curious.
Yeah.
Which goes into Postgres internals at a great detail, and it's been like a good resource for us and our team.
Yeah.
So shout out to that guy.
Yeah, I definitely read the website, but I haven't spoken to the man. Maybe we should try to
I've
get him.
emailed with him a few times.
Yeah.
I tried to convince him to join us, but it was too difficult to sell.
Yeah.
Maybe you can.
No, I mean, I tried to convince Eric Ridge to join Tembo in early on, and he was too hard to sell
I'm
too.
sure you did, of course. I would have loved to convince him. Part like the naive part of me was like, I can't wait to convince Eric to join Parade. And then I talked to him, realized he basically is the co-founder and CTO of TCDI, and I was like, okay, this isn't happening.
Yeah. Like I was probably the 25th person to go after him, and you were probably the 27th person to go after him. Whatever, like it's
exactly.
It's never, yeah. I think it's great. I'm excited. I'm kind of excited that these people, the I'll call them like the gods of Postgres, are kind of locked up on a Mount Olympus. We don't get to see them or talk to them very much. That's exciting to me to know that, like, someday we'll get there, and like someday if our companies are strong enough, maybe we can get to work with those people. But it's great to be in an ecosystem where there is like a tier of people that are just amazing. Have been, I was talking to Sameh, who's the CTO here at Tembo, and he did a quick analysis to see that, like, most people become a committer at Postgres takes like around 7 or 8 years, of contributing to Postgres before you get the commit bit, which is like, wow, that is an amazing. It's like, you think of venture-backed startups, it's like 2 startups worth of effort, like sticking around for your full vesting before you get to be so it's like, has nothing to do with the company that you're working for. It's just you're going to dedicate yourself to an open source project for the core of your professional life. Because once you get there, you probably want to stick around for another 8 years, I'm sure, So, it's pretty cool.
But these people are great, and I think that's one of the things that's so great about the Postgres community. Like, it's like, even though Eric and so on, like, they're amazing people and they're doing great things and they're very busy and so on, like, they're still quite accessible. Really, right? Like, Eric is very accessible in the PGRX Discord and so on. So I do feel like by building open source, we still get to work with them, even though not, in like the same organization. And some other people I forgot to shout out, which perhaps deserve a lot of shout out, is maybe like Umar and Ozban from Citus, right? They were like truly visionaries, I think, of the Postgres world, building extensions when Postgres was a toy database, as like people would like be critical of.
We're definitely standing on their shoulders too, like they did a lot of hard work early on, and it's great. If you had a magic wand, you could add any feature to Postgres tomorrow and it existed. Is there anything that you would use that wand on? Do you have any things you wish Postgres was that it isn't?
Oh, that's very interesting. I think the answer would be better distributed support, actually. And not, obviously what Citus has done is amazing, but like the whole reason Yugabyte exists today, for example, is because there's only so much you can do when you're an extension like Citus did, right? And like Yugabyte is basically trying to be the Postgres equivalent of CockroachDB. And I think if that was baked in natively to Postgres, it would be good for a lot of people that are building on Postgres, us included.
Yeah, that's a good one. Do you listen to podcasts very much?
Not very much. Okay. Not very much. Only yours.
Okay, good. Thank you. No, I listen. I listen to like Postgres FM all the time. I'm huge fans of those guys. Like, I do listen to a lot of podcasts, but just gonna ask you what your favorites are. But you already said, All right. Well, cool. It was great talking to you. Where can listeners find you online? Maybe just tell us about yourself and then ParadeDB URL and so on.
Yeah, so you can find us on paradedb.com, or on GitHub is ParadeDB as well. It's open source. We welcome contributions and users and so on. Of course, like we're very responsive. As for me specifically, I think you're gonna link my Twitter in the bio, but my Twitter is Philippe Noël. It's basically my handle across every social media. Like I feel like when you can find one, you sort of keep it, right? There's so many people now on the internet, so that's my handle everywhere. People can find me there, and I love chatting.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining. Love to have you on again in the future. We'll see. Again, it's super early in this podcast's life, but track what's going on with ParadeDB, and if there's more stuff to talk about, we'll get back together.
Of course, yeah, would love to be there. Thank you for having me.